Hey everybody, welcome to My Green Pets. I am here with Dustin from Here But Not up in Calgary, Canada, I believe.
Yep, that's correct.
And we're going to do something a little different today. In the past 6 months or so, my carnivorous plant collection has gone from 0 plants to about 10 plants, and several of those are Nepenthes. So I've got Dustin here today, and Dustin's been growing Nepenthes for quite a bit longer than me. And I was hoping that we could just chat a little bit about general Nepenthes culture, maybe touch here and there on how it's different from orchid culture, and why Nepenthes are just really cool in general. So, Dustin, welcome. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, William. Honestly, I'm so excited about this. Nepenthes is where I started into plants before orchids.
Okay.
So it's kind of nice for me because it's come full circle.
What do you first notice? I mean, if someone says, well, you can grow Nepenthes and orchids side by side, right? I mean, the answer is pretty much yes.
Honest, probably, yeah. Like they honestly, so there's a photo that I saw from Jeremiah where he has a like he's in situ. There's like Nepenthes and then a Paphiopedilum Rothschildianum like growing in the wild side by side. So
Yeah.
from like the conditions and and the things that we're trying to target, yeah, they're pretty similar. And I think that like in terms of potting media, light, all of those things are pretty close.
Okay.
I don't actually grow them side by side though. I baby the Nepenthes, like they're in a terrarium that has like it's all enclosed and the humidity is really high. And you can see that the orchids get like 30%
They
humidity and
get apartment
whatever.
conditions.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, then that's interesting because I've heard more than one grower say that Nepenthes are actually easier to grow overall than orchids.
I would bet that that probably depends on your experience with plants overall.
Oh,
Because the approach is like a little bit different for orchids. They need really like distinct cycles of wetness and dryness, in my experience. Like that may vary by individual species, but a Nepenthes is more like a typical house plant where the roots need to stay moist and it needs light to grow. And so there's like a yeah,
it's more
I
like a
think that
tip when you're used to like houseplants in general. It seems like Nepenthes fits more into that keep it moist, don't let it dry out type of thing.
totally. And there's even a guy like I think he's in California. I meant to check his name, but I didn't. He grows Nepenthes by a windowsill the same way that I'm growing these. He
Mm.
uses a denser potting media like that's based in peat moss and then perlite that's allows it to have drainage and structure. And the biggest thing for him is like the adaptation time so that the roots can establish to manage the water flow into the plant that for the water that's lost through transpiration, and he just grows them like by a window in low like regular house conditions. I I value these plants too much at this point because
And
some
they
of them
are
are really
just
expensive.
valuable in and of themselves, right?
Yeah, and so I haven't pulled the trigger on that. But some of them, like I've got that the Rajah Colossi cross. That thing is going to be way too big to even if it was the only plant in my terrarium, it's going to be too large to grow in there. So eventually, I do have a backup plan to start like experimenting and pulling them out and giving them that adaptation period. The problem that I have right now is that when I get plants, they come in and sometimes they have no roots. And if you try and do that, put it in room humidity, it's not going to be able to compensate and it's just going to end up dead.
I'm going to start out by just showing you the three types that I have. So, these are from Kujawa Orchids. Actually, I have three major Nepenthes growers within an hour drive of me, so it's pretty cool.
Oh, that's so cool.
Jeremiah lives about an hour and a half south.
Nice.
Nepenthes God, Jeff lives about 30 minutes west, and then
Yeah.
Kujawa lives about 45 minutes south. So it's just
Oh, those
like
guys
it's
have
crazy.
really cool collections too. Like I've
It's
seen them on Instagram. It's awesome.
they're all focused on species and propagating species. And um, one thing that I didn't realize, I was like, why are these plants so expensive? Because I mean, you're talking about little seedlings like this,
Yeah,
$500-600, maybe even more, because you have to have a male plant and a female plant in bloom at the same time.
totally.
And it's like
And it can take some of those species like 20 to 25 years before you ever see a flower. So like in the realm of like what orchids are, I feel like they're for me, I think that they're more challenging,
and
frankly.
Nepenthes is more challenging because of
Yeah,
the time
than orchids.
investment and
Yeah. Because orchids I can get to
specialized
bloom
conditions.
from seed in like 3 to 10 years at most.
Uh-huh. I love it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this one is a stenophila or stenophila. Both of these are. And
Sweet.
this one is, I think it's a lowlander, and it's growing, all of these are growing in the same conditions in my orchid tent. So a high of about 28 degrees C, low of about 19 degrees C. Those are summer temps. Winter temps are a few degrees cooler than that. So there is a nice 10-degree day-night differential. Humidity is about 60% in there, averaging. Sometimes it's 90, like right after watering, and sometimes it gets down to in the 40s.
Nice.
But so far, this one it's really showing that incidence of what they call leaf jump.
Yeah.
You start
Oh,
with
that's
a
great.
little baby plant, and then suddenly one day it just comes out with a really big one. And so that's exciting because I think that's like a milestone to hit with an Nepenthes plant.
Yeah, absolutely. Although sometimes it feels like watching paint dry, waiting for that to happen, because I feel like they sometimes they grow so slow.
Well, that's good to hear because I'm noticing the different ones that I have, they do have different rates of growing. It is cool to see the pictures inflate. And I don't know, as an orchid grower, you kind of wait all year to see the flowers bloom.
Yeah.
But something like this, it's constantly putting out new pictures, and it's the same kind of joy that you get out of watching an orchid develop its bud and blooming every time it creates a new picture. So
Yeah, I
uh,
totally agree.
I
And the nice
noticed.
thing is, like the pictures each time, sometimes they're a little bit different, like as the plant matures, because initially they don't look quite the same. So if you get something that's like a seedling, you're like, well, this is what it looks like now, and it's going to look way different than this,
Right.
especially like Veitchii and the Veitchii hybrids, like super cool.
That's what I was noticing with the next ones that I wanted to show you. This is it's Bongso by a cross of robcantleyi and densiflora. So I think these are all the big kind of frilly necked ones, kind of
Yeah, yeah,
vampire collar ones. And
right
yeah,
on.
so I got these as much smaller seedlings, and it's just wonderful to see each one getting bigger with each pitcher. And
Hmm.
I've been following advice that I read to put, I think California Carnivores is where I read it, to take a single Osmocote pellet and just drop it in the pitcher when it
Nice.
opens.
Yeah,
And it's a hybrid. Hybrids are supposed to be easier, more flexible, more adaptable. um,
definitely.
but it's also cool to see the variation because these are from the same pod, the
Yeah.
same the same parents, but this one looks a little bit greener, this one looks a little bit redder. And as you say, as they get bigger, every time they open a new pitcher, they look different.
Yeah, which is like when you're growing an orchid and it flowers, it's like every time it flowers in the future, you're expecting the same thing. So sometimes I'm like, well, I did it, now I don't really care.
I see
But
what you mean. Yeah, you don't get that. It's not like, I mean, sometimes the first blooming on an orchid isn't that great, and then they can get some, but yeah, once they've gotten to that point, that's what you're going to expect every year, and you're just trying to get more of them, I
totally.
guess. Let's see what else. This one, I saw somebody post something on it's a Nepenthes group on Facebook, and this one is called Nepenthes pervillii or pervilli or something like that.
I'm not
And
familiar with
it's
that one.
from the Seychelles Islands, and it's supposed to be very, very different. If you look at the like evolutionary tree of Nepenthes, it's supposed to be toward the bottom, like it's one of the founding members of the clan. So it's quite different in the way that it looks and grows. When you were talking
Is it like
about,
a larger plant in its final stage, or do they have smaller pictures? Like what's
I think the
or
pitchers can get up to, I don't know, maybe this big.
uh,
So not huge, but definitely decent. The vines can get like 30, 40 feet long. And they grow in direct sun up in the like on the mountainous peaks of two of these Seychelles Islands. And
nice.
yeah, it's
Perfect for home conditions where you can grow 30 feet of vine.
exactly right. That's in a 5 by 3 tent. That should be no problem.
Yeah, totally.
But that's the good thing about like you said, watching paint dry. It gives you plenty of time to think about that. And also, that's hoping that you even get it to that point. But
Yeah,
um,
very.
what you mentioned earlier about acclimatization of new plants. So it was very interesting the way that this was packed. It was kind of, the roots were kind of wadded in a ball of sphagnum, and then that was all wrapped in plastic. And then, when I got it, I had to really wrestle it out of there. And there were roots on the thing. So I potted it up. And only about 5 hours later, the one little pitcher on it had withered. And I was like, whoa, that is fast. I'm not used to plants reacting that quickly to a change
Totally.
in conditions.
Yeah, I get the same thing. Like every time I get a new plant, I'm like the old pictures will go. I still like I don't cut them off or anything. I'll like put water in them just because they can pull water into the plant. But like I expect that it'll lose all of them.
That's what was interesting because there's this whole thing on acclimatization, putting a bag over them, slowly decreasing humidity. I didn't bother to read any of that stuff but then I did give it a good soak, and the next day that pitcher had perked up again, like
Awesome.
the streakiness had gone away. Um, but yeah, it's growing a couple new ones, and I'm guessing that it's starting to get established. But yeah, I used a pinguicula mix that I had. It was just like sand and perlite, and then I put some granite rocks at the bottom there. And so anyway, we're gonna
Right
see.
on. It looks like it's coming through. Honest, for a lot of my Nepenthes, I don't see like full establishment for probably 6 to 12 months. Like
Really?
like they establish and they start growing, but until I see continuous like progressive strides in leaf growth and size,
Right.
it's not. It takes like a full year. And I think that that's like we'll talk about this later, but I think it's because it has to do with the media that I'm using and the water. And a lot of the times, like I'll get a plant and I'll like look at the roots when I first get it, and I kid
Yeah.
you not, there's like two or three of them
Yeah.
and then in 6 months, I can see the like roots growing, along the side of the pot. I don't know if we can see this here, but you can see some of the roots.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and
So
that's
they're
on like a
black. They're
species.
like black roots.
Yeah, and that's on a species that's or like hybrid that's not supposed to be very rooty. And so I think that establishment period is largely due to the plant like setting roots, which are just slow growing.
Yeah, which is fine as long as I see growth and new things forming. If it's slow, slow and steady wins the race. So I'm happy about.
Totally.
So that
Yeah.
one's kind of in it. And this one, this one attracted me because it was so different and also because it has a reputation as hard to grow. So I was like,
I
that's
want
what
the
I
hard to grow
want.
one. Yeah, absolutely. I'm not gonna
Uh,
lie. That's how I feel about the Nepenthes in general. I'm like, I want the ones that everyone's like, no, you can't do that in your conditions.
yeah. You're like, yeah. So the last one, you'll like this one. This is a Rajah by edwardsiana. And this was put together by Nepenthes God. So I've visited him and I've seen both of the parents. And the Rajah pictures are this big, the edwardsiana
So
pictures.
cool.
Actually, let me run real quick. Here's one of the edwardsiana pictures. He gave me a dry one.
What?
So here's what they look like,
That's so crazy.
right? And the teeth are just ridiculous.
I love that it's kept its entire structure and form, even though it's entirely dead and dried off.
When they dry out, they just look exactly like they did. He has a stack of them that he just keeps, to just, and I kind of do
That's
the same thing with orchid flowers and stuff. But yeah, the
yeah,
fact that it just keeps those teeth
so awesome.
and the ridges and everything. And if you don't know what these look like, if you're watching, these are typically like a reddish color and a very bright red. This part is called the peristome, I believe.
Yeah.
So
I,
yeah,
this species is the thing that like drew me in at the
yeah.
very
Oh, it's the
beginning. The
holy
teeth, I
grail.
was just like, whoa, that's so cool. It's like that was like when I was like have it had reptiles and stuff, and I was like, it's like a plant that's like an animal.
Yes.
And then I found out that they're impossible to get and they're expensive and they don't grow well in home conditions. And well, here we are.
Well, I would love to have an edwardsiana, and I've um, Drew. I think his name is Drew Martinez at Carnivoro, a nursery in Texas. He's got a video that says they're not as exacting on highland temperatures as maybe some of the other highland species. So,
Yeah.
sometimes I wonder: is it the low temperature that's really necessary, or is it just a drop that's necessary? Like is it a relative thing?
Uh,
So,
it's an interesting question. Like on my hybrid, so I have a hybrid of Edwardsiana with Hamada, and it was new last year. And initially, it started to decline. Like the leaves were getting smaller, and I was like, "Oh no, I found the limit of what I can grow in my conditions." But then now at the peak of summer, it's starting to throw large leaves again. And so like I've said before, it takes them a while to establish roots, and I kind of just let them do their thing. And so part of me thinks that uh, maybe but at least with hybrids, our perspectives on temperature are not necessarily as precise as they need to be
Right.
when we see in the wild. That said, I'm in Canada, so my conditions still, like right now we get up to like 30 degrees Celsius during the day and then down to probably 25 to 27 at night on really warm like periods like
Oh,
during
okay.
July and August. So it's quite warm. And the temperature difference that I see is only about 3 degrees Celsius ish, sometimes five if it's like particularly crazy weather. But like even in the winter, it's like minus 35 outside, day or night. Like my inside temperatures are pretty stable. So, but I don't grow Edwardsiana species,
Yeah.
right? I only grow hybrids, and frankly, the species that I do grow, they're not doing great.
Interesting.
So I have a albo marginata, which is a lowland species. Does not like my conditions, so that could indicate that I have more intermediate conditions, or the
Okay.
plant just doesn't like me. I also have a Nepenthes, oh no,
Oh
Aristokeloides,
my God. Yeah.
the one that I can't say. That's why I was like, oh no, because I got to say it out loud. Anyways, that one in the summer stops pitching, but in the winter grows fine, and it's like tripled its size since I got it last year. So uh, I see more fussing and dramatics out of the species than I do with the hybrids for sure.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. So I was hoping that even though I don't particularly like what I've seen the results of this cross, because
Yeah,
Edwardsiana is more like a vase shaped pitcher and Rajah is more like a urn shape.
yeah,
So when you get those, you kind of get this intermediate shape. And I'm all about hybrids accentuating the things you like about species, not blending them together and you just end up with this kind of.
yeah.
But I wanted to see if I could grow this thing. And what I noticed, first of all, was that it doesn't hold on to pitchers very long at all. Like it'll put out a new group, new growth. A pitcher will grow on it. After a few weeks, the lid starts to turn brown, and then another couple weeks, and the whole pitcher's turned brown. So I don't know if that's a temperature issue or if it just hasn't gotten roots established so that it can get water. Right now, it's just in sphagnum moss with just some orchid bark at the bottom for a little
Yeah.
bit of drainage, but
So let's like talk about that a little bit because
okay,
the interesting thing about that is that Raja comes from serpentine soils that are a little bit more alkaline,
okay,
and it's atypical compared to a lot of Nepenthes in its natural requirements. Plus, those pitchers are pretty small, so I assume that you're probably not feeding them, which is it's hard to do when they're that small. I've
yeah.
seen some people get like a needle and actually inject it into the pitcher.
I was told to do that. I actually forced a tiny, tiny granule of fertilizer into a pitcher, and of course it rotted and died within a couple weeks. It did not like that, but I'm hoping that maybe some of that nitrogen got into the plant before it killed the pitcher.
Totally. So I wouldn't be surprised on some of those, especially the Raja hybrids, if increasing the soil pH a bit helps counteract that, or at least it facilitate good root growth. Because so like let's like dial this back and like explain where I'm coming from with that. I've been experimenting with pH for the orchids, right? And I tried doing different types of pH adjustment. I like really went like all the way out there and tried everything. I tried malic acid, citric acid, phosphoric acid, and even vinegar at one point.
So you were
And
trying to lower the pH on the orchid.
lower the pH because my tap water is about eight pH. I did
Okay.
not do this with the Nepenthes. This is only with my orchids. But the value that I found of this is as I continued experimenting with that, I started like destroying my collection. Things stopped like growing. And it's not like I was dropping the pH to like a 2 pH. I
Uh-huh.
was using like a few drops of these things to drop the pH to like 6 from 7.8.
Right. Which
And
is
over time,
rainwater, I think is around 6.
yeah, yeah. And so over time, I started to see things creep up in my plants. And so I've actually stopped entirely. If I do a pH adjustment, it's like once every 2 or 3 months using phosphoric acid. And that's only on the orchids. But my point with this is that the acidity and the products of those things ended up really like affecting my plants slowly over a long period of time in a negative way. And it's only now, like a full year later, that I've stopped that I'm really seeing good progressive new growth with all of my orchids without any impact of the junk that was happening before. And
Okay.
so part of me is like, I wish that I didn't do that, but I have the
You're
knowledge
glad.
of like of what that impact was, right?
Right.
And when things decay, like bark and wood and things in your potting media, the products of that decay are sometimes like acetic acid, which
Okay.
is vinegar, right? There's some certain things like that. So when I was first getting into plants, I was like, I don't understand what people meant by sour soil or like old
Oh,
soil and why that's bad for plants. And now it like clicks and I'm like, I get it. So with a species like Rajah that comes from alkaline soils that would constantly be buffering any acidity up, I could see how that would cause problems, potentially like nutrient availability issues in the soil if it's acidic.
what kind of soil mix would you recommend for a Raja cross?
So if it was my plant, what I would probably do is use a blend of inert media. So pumice, perlite, you could even use leca. If you're going to use leca, I would flush with any of these, flush them out really well because they do have salts and minerals that like
Those
are
are the
in the
little clay balls.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
but we're talking about a tiny little thing here. I mean,
you can even get smaller ones, but like look how big the size of those grains are. Like
oh, the roots are just kind of reaching around them.
yeah, they're enormous. And when I got
Interesting.
this plant, it was tiny. It was a little bit bigger than yours, but not much. And so the other thing that I do, same thing for orchids, is that I
Tell us real
top
quick
dress.
what plant that is.
This is villosa by robcantleyi.
Okay.
So a really neat hybrid, a novel hybrid, because these villosa hybrids didn't exist like 10 years ago.
I would.
Um, And so on the top, I top dress it with either a little bit of sphagnum or grow cubes, which is like an inert version of sphagnum,
Oh
basically.
yeah, it's like
And what,
rock wool.
yeah, and what that does is it locks the moisture in, even though the rocks themselves aren't constantly moist or wet, rather,
Oh,
it
interesting.
holds it in. So then you get this like, dynamic conditions where at the base of the plant it's moist, so new roots have good conditions, and then as they push further down, they're reaching the like pH neutral to slightly alkaline. And what I do too is like regularly add a small amount of tap water, like 20%. And again, my tap water is slightly alkaline,
Right.
7.9
Mine
pH.
is too. Mine's super alkaline.
Yeah, and so by adding a little bit, and I wouldn't go too much, or maybe sometimes I'll flush with pure tap water if there's a problem, a plant that's causing issues. I'll soak it in pure water, tap water, and then rush distilled water through afterwards. But generally, like when I'm watering, I'm using distilled or a small ratio of tap water to distilled water, just to add the calcium and buffering capacity, so that the species that I'm growing, which again are hybrids of villosa, edwardsiana, and rajah,
Gotcha.
like all alkaline type species or hybrids of those. And so far, it seems to be doing well. Like I've been growing all of my Nepenthes now in this collection for up to 3 years, and some of the newer ones, the more complicated hybrids, for about a year and a half to 2 or to 1 year.
Okay. I wonder, I'm trying to think of something I could get in my local garden center that would fit that bill. I don't think you can just buy perlite. You can buy vermiculite. Is that inert?
No, I wouldn't do that. Vermiculate's it's like a spongy material, so it's going to work more like pure sphagnum.
Okay.
Um, you should be able to order it online though, I would think, because I've found a few places that will sell like big bags of perlite and pumice. There's also akadama. It's like a
I saw that it's for bonsai.
yeah, and that work it's like the same sort of thing. It's like a clay material that's been baked in kind of the same equivalent of like what leca is. And there's a few different options around those as well.
Okay.
And the nice thing, I think the reason those are really good is because they hold structure and they don't decay. So
Mm,
you have this like little plant right now, and let's say it's in pure sphagnum and it does really good, and then you need to repot it in a year and a half. It's
you
really
have to,
hard to get the sphagnum off
you have to
the
pull it
roots.
off. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you like bust any roots in the process of trying to adjust, like do that, you potentially set the plant back, or you leave the sphagnum on and it continues acidifying and causing potentially conditions that aren't ideal for a species that it's adapted to different conditions.
All right. Well, that's what now see this one is in a totally inorganic mix. Like the Pinguicula mix is just it might have peat in it. It's like peat, sand, perlite, but then yeah, so I'm not sure. But yeah, so
Well, and
that's
that species may come from an area that's more like boggy and peaty and be adapted to acidity too.
right.
Like I think the thing that's important too is not to say that all Nepenthes need alkaline conditions, because it's really quite it's a really small subset of certain plants that grow in really specific conditions. But that includes Raja.
Right.
Raja.
Okay.
My
Well,
nose is so itchy today, and I'm like, oh, why does it
good
have to
thing
be
you're
the
not
day I'm doing
allergic to
video?
plants.
Right? Maybe. Jeez.
Well, I might actually maybe get in contact with one of the nurseries and because a lot of them sell pre-prepared mix. And just because I'm such a beginner at this, I might order some pre-made mix just to, say, ask them, do you have an inorganic pre-mixed batch that you could, send me and see if they have anything. Because I
Well, I know
don't,
that there's a couple places online that sell that sort of mix for Paphiopedilums.
yeah.
And so to me, I would consider these pretty equivalent to paths
Hmm.
because they literally grow in the same
Right next to them.
areas.
Yeah.
Yeah, in similar conditions for certain species, right? Like like Nepenthes, and there paths that come from different conditions, but there's this sort of like path rock mix that's kind of a blend of a few different things, and I would expect that that would probably work pretty well.
Okay. All right. I'll do some looking around. So you think I should get it out of the sphagnum?
I, if it's growing fine right now, then continue how it is. Like I'm not, if it starts to decline or you start to see a decrease in growth or leaf longevity, then I probably would. To
Okay.
me, when you start seeing leaves aborting earlier than expected, that's
Oh,
related to nutrients. And so if you have like low nitrogen or low other micronutrients, the plant starts moving those nutrients from old leaves to new leaves.
I
Now, it's still a hard thing to decide on like whether that's the case or not, because if it doesn't have a good established root
each leaf
system,
does seem to be bigger than the last, so that's a
yeah,
good sign, right?
then that's good. And if it's not broke, don't change it, right? Like I think it's good to experiment, but maybe not with the most expensive plant in your collection.
Yeah, that's the funniest thing
Yeah.
because I've been growing orchids for like 15 years, and this is the most expensive plant I've
Oh
ever
yeah.
bought.
So if I told you the most expensive Nepenthes I buy, you'd tell me I'm an
It's
idiot.
ridiculous. Well, but it's the thing. I visited four Nepenthes growers this year, and they're all cashing in. You know what I mean? And there's a huge number of people that they're like, what? I can make $500 on this. So there's a bunch of people trying to get into this market right now. So I'm
Totally.
hoping that for us, the growers, that's going to mean more availability and lower prices.
Honestly, like for me, then like that's all cool. You're talking about how you like hybridize plants and you kind of like homogenize this look of two really cool species
Yeah.
into something that's not that great. I am so excited for the next phase. So
Yeah.
the same thing we did with orchids, right? Where people were breeding them and then like line breeding for selected outcomes and
Yeah.
traits. Like I'm like, so if you take a villosa crossed with veitchii and then you cross that with a villosa crossed with robcantleyi, you could get like a veitchii type plant with enormous teeth,
Yeah.
and it's not going to be all of them, but if you get two of those and then you
Oh,
sibling cross
oh
them,
yeah,
oh,
Subcross,
dude,
yeah.
it's going to be
And
so
I
cool.
think well, that was one thing. We have about 5 minutes left, by the way. Actually, it's closer to three, so I'm gonna try to talk quick here. But that's one thing I was kind of before I realized how difficult it was to get the two plants in bloom at the same time and cross them. I was kind of complaining about these Nepenthes crosses all look the same. What are you guys breeding
Totally.
for? And I think, it was explained to me when my Nepenthes blooms, I put pollen on everything just to see what'll happen. And it's like, oh, okay, that's where we're at right
Yeah, absolutely. And frankly, like I'm breeding orchids and stuff, and I'm pretty much the same way. If it's in bloom, I'm like, make a cross,
now.
see
Let's
if it'll
do it.
grow. Because there's like for every cross I attempt, there's probably 75% of them that don't work or bail. And so a lot of the times it's just like, can I make something? And then I feel like if I'm invested in the seedlings as they're growing, that means it's a good cross.
Okay,
But
yeah.
like maybe that's BS.
When you feel that, yeah, like, ooh, this is gonna be, and you can see
Yeah.
it early on with plants like Nepenthes.
Yeah, and
You
I
can
know
see
that
it.
we're like short on time, so I'll keep this short. But like one of them is this is a Roth cross with Henryanum and Glaucophyllum. And so I've crossed this onto another what's it called? Sanderianum hybrid. It's called
Oh,
half angel hair. So it's got
okay.
long petals. And I
Yeah.
am so excited for that cross. Like it's still in pod, but the pod is fat. And I'm just like, this, if I have to like, if there's a fire in my building, I'm grabbing that one plant.
It's gonna have like a pink pouch, but maybe long petals, and
I hope
who
so.
knows?
I think that there's some really interesting colors that you don't normally see in multiflorals. And so I think that the outcome of that, but what I hope is for a really wide flower spread, like you would see on a Roth, but with different colors.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Dustin, it's been a pleasure speaking with you again today, sir.
You
I
too. Thank
hope
you so
that
much.
maybe we can do like a 6 month update on the Nepenthes and see, just if they're still alive, if they're still making it.
Yeah, man, I'd be super down. Love to hear more about how they're going for you.
Cool. Well, if you've been watching, thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Have a good day.